Hey, it's Courtney Barriger, your host of Environmental Style Now, the A to Z podcast on all that is sustainable fashion. Wow. I am back after a year-long break, and let me tell you, a lot has happened in between. Aside from my beautiful and challenging life on the road, living out of my Airstream with my now fiance, um, I was honored with an award for my commitment to the sustainable fashion conversation from Hollywood Film Festival, given at the Chinese Theater. Wow, I mean, it was a humbling and unexpected honor that I did not see coming. So, thank you so much for acknowledging my contribution. I feel very, very seen. And speaking of being seen, our brand sponsor, Holding Court, was seen in British GQ and Vanity Fair in winter and spring of this year, so that was such a treat. Also, in step with the spontaneous nature of my Airstream life, we are recording right now in a bomb shelter in Laurel Canyon. Yes, so this is the quality of sound that's going on in here, and I'm probably about, 5 feet underground. And on this episode of ES Now, today I'm with Ryland Engelhart, co-founder and executive director of Kiss the Ground. He's here to share with you the exciting possibilities of regenerative farming and what you can do to help forward this groundbreaking movement to sequester carbon in the most natural way possible. Hello, I'm Courtney Barriger, and this is ES Now. Today I have the honor to be with Ryland Engelhart, producer of the inspiring documentary Kiss the Ground that you can see on Netflix. Ryland is an advocate and educator in the regenerative farming movement and practices what he preaches on his own small farm with his family in California. You might know his name from the Cafe Gratitude community, and it is my joy to introduce to you his life's work. Let's jump right in.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about it for people who don't know about the documentary on regenerative farming?
Yeah, so the film is called Kiss the Ground, which is inspired from a Rumi quote, which says, "Let the beauty you love be all that you do. There's hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground." So there's hundreds of ways to love the earth or to love creation. And I like to say that the documentary is a documentary, a love story of humanity falling back in love with Mother Nature. And it really is sharing a hopeful, compelling vision of how soil and regenerative agriculture and the way that nature works and photosynthesis works is that the way we manage the land could arguably be the most effective solution to pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, the upper or the excess carbon out of the atmosphere that is, primarily driving climate change, global warming, unstable weather events, floods, droughts, fires, ocean acidification, et cetera, and that through understanding how nature works and how we farm, that we could actually work with nature's technology and that we could take a lot of that excess carbon that's in the atmosphere back down into our soils through the living plant, through photosynthesis, and store that carbon in the soil. And the film shares it in an entertaining, compelling, inspiring, hopeful, beautiful way with, lots of great human characters from, farmers and ranchers that are the best practitioners of this work to, some entertainers. Woody Harrelson narrates it, and it's got science, it's got entertainment, it's got beauty, it's got hope, it's got large examples of large scale regeneration and restoration that have happened around the planet that show how large of a scale nature that's been denuded and is destroyed can actually come back to life and be very productive for economy and for human and community and societal health. And that it comes down to regenerative farming. And regenerative farming is a term that describes farming where you're producing a food or a fiber or fuel or building material. Something is coming off that land that's becoming that our society depends on as an input, as a resource. But instead of degrading the ecosystem to produce that product, it actually has a regenerative effect on the ecosystem. So it's kind of a paradigm breaking idea in the current context of agriculture. Not to say that it's a current or a breakthrough idea from this moment. It really it stems on the philosophy and the practice and lived science of many cultures that were much more place-based and understood their role in nature and how nature could thrive under their care and stewardship and management. So there's certain indigenous cultures all around the world that have exemplified this, and there's a contemporary agriculture and an agriculture that in many cases for 10,000 years has been degrading soil, turning land into desert through overgrazing of animals, tilling up of soil, and then in the last 100+ years, the introduction of a lot of synthetic chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, and that adding to the situation of desertifying and destroying our soils, and that we can rethink that whole approach and grow food in a way that actually heals the planet, brings the carbon out of the atmosphere back into the ground, allows for more water to be infiltrating into our aquifers, recharging them, recharging springs and making, streams and rivers come back, enhancing biodiversity, creating more nutrient-dense food, creating greater habitats for not only food production or for crops that we're harvesting, but also more environments for biodiversity and wild life to also thrive inside of an agricultural system.
Yeah, I thought it was so interesting watching the documentary when you showed how every season where it's a harvest and a tilling happens, the amount of carbon that just is pouring out of the soil, going up into the air, and it's like recorded from space that this is cyclical and it has to do with farming. It's just so interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah, we mostly don't think about, we only mostly think about carbon as this sort of bad guy, offender thing that's creating global warming, climate change, but we don't think about that carbon is the building block of all things that are alive, living, that between like 13 and 15% of you and I are made of carbon. And, that carbon has come from us eating either green plants or things that ate green plants that ultimately got that carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesizing plants. When plants photosynthesize, they use the sun's energy. They pull carbon out of the atmosphere through little stomatas on the bottom of their leaves. They sip that carbon in like straws, and they build their bodies, and then they send those carbon sugars, carbohydrates, carbon and hydrogen, carbon and water, down into the roots, and they feed microorganisms that are like the microbiome of the soil. And as they feed those microorganisms that carbon sugar, those microorganisms provide minerals and nutrients into those plants and those foods. And so you have this exchange of, nutrient density going from, the nutrients going from the soil into the plants. And then you have this exchange of the carbon feeding into the microorganisms, the biology of the soil, and that carbon then becomes stored in that soil, and that becomes that exchange, and that is that 5 million year old technology that ultimately created the planet that we have today, is that exchange of plants and microorganisms pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and building that carbon into our soils, which have created the stable living planet that we live on. And there's actually twice as much carbon in our soils currently as there is in the atmosphere. And there's actually a lot more room for more carbon in our soils that is ready to receive it if we, we're stewarding land in a way that really acknowledged this bigger connection, bigger loop of the carbon cycle.
It's really beautiful, actually, to think about carbon. I mean, everything in the news today is that carbon is the enemy and that it's horrible, but it's actually food. It's precious. And so what are some ways that we can speed that up, the sequestering and the microbiome?
So, there's we as Kiss the Ground have become an education and advocacy nonprofit, really telling stories and making the good news be known through content creation and courses that we offer online, like master classes, kind of version of. We have a soil advocacy training course that we invite people to participate in. We have a regenerative gardening course that teaches you how to do it in a small scale in your backyard. We provide educational scholarships to farmers who are wanting to go in this direction, and we provide scholarships to the best educators and practitioners in regenerative ag, and then we're working on some policy initiatives to help change policy at the farm bill level, to encourage this change at that level. But from sort of someone at home hearing this for the first time, with no engagement in agriculture or growing food or the food industry or a food business or a restaurant, or really it comes down to one, really looking at everything that comes from nature. It wants to go back to nature. So how do we be a good steward of nature? And, really looking at composting as, one thing that people can do as a small practical act of making sure that everything that came from the soil can go back to the soil. That we waste a lot of food in our refrigerators, in our leftovers, and how can we facilitate that back, turning that back into soil through composting. And there's lots of resources online. There's resources on our website. There's community compost, where if you don't even want to compost, you can go find someone in your neighborhood who's composting and bring your green waste to their compost. So that's one thing. Starting to be more connected to where your food comes from. So, know a farmer, find a farmer at a farmer's market, and ask those farmers how they're growing their food, and how do they take care of their soil, how do they nourish their soil, and find farmers that are lit up about regenerative agriculture, and that they're using cover crops, and they're integrating animals into their system, and they're using compost, and they're into diversified agriculture and not monoculture. And so find some farmers that are that sell in your area, and get to know them and be their champion. I 2 years ago moved to my sister's farm in Fillmore, so that I could be closer to and start learning about and practicing what I have theoretically learned through a lot of research and reading and conversations, and starting to put that into practice. And it's a joyful and beautiful and humbling journey to start to grow something, grow food, growing a plant, taking care of a plant until it bears fruit, and getting to be nourished by that, and participating in that process is a beautiful, humbling, and fulfilling journey. And so I encourage people to start, a garden, a little, whether it's a small garden, if you have just a little space, or if you have, a backyard, create a garden, start growing some food. It's very fulfilling, and you actually get to experience being part of a regenerative cycle of life, that you're participating in growth and creation versus just consumption. And so, to summarize, compost, grow a garden, and find a farmer near you that is doing regenerative agriculture, and champion them, have them be part of your weekly meal plan. And then as human beings, we advocate, we talk about what we love online, social media, have farmers who are doing the right things be known, and be supported, and be championed, and make them cool, make them a hero that they are, and a celebrity that they are, and a someone that people should know about because of what the integrity of what they're doing. And we have a map on our website called the Regenerative Farm Map, which allows you to look up farms in your area. And there's thousands of farms across the country and even the world that are registered there to let consumers know that they exist, and that they're would love to be supported.
So if I were to ask my farmer at the farmer's market, hey, so curious, are you doing any of these regenerative farming practices? You said it was cover crops and using animals and not using like a monocrop system. So what are those exactly? Like, how does that help the soil? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So some of the principles of regenerative agriculture. So one thing is you could say, or one distinction is called no-till or low-till. So you'll hear people talking about that, where you're growing food where you're not every year tilling the soil. So you're not cutting up. Soil is like there's life in soil. The soil is a network of this living system, this web of life. And so when you till it, you essentially break that web of life. And so basically, and ultimately, as you said in the film, you see when that land is being tilled, you're oxidizing, you're exposing to the elements, you're exposing to the air, the sun, the wind, the soil, and the biology in that soil. And when it's being exposed to the elements, a lot of it can die, and then those living organisms that are dying then oxidize and turn into carbon dioxide in the air. And so yeah, low or no-till agricultural systems, systems that or farming practices that are focused on, as I said, cover cropping. Cover cropping meaning instead of having the soil tilled and bare when you're not growing a cash crop, you're having hopefully multiple species of other plants that are feeding the biology of the soil, because soil is alive and everything alive needs to eat. And the way most soil organisms eat is through living plants feeding those microorganisms carbon, sugars, and glues. All just like all people like sugar, microbes like sugar too. And the way they get their sugar is through the living plants pumping those carbons and sugars, carbohydrates into the ground. So it's cover cropping is a practice of keeping soil health healthy when you're not growing a cash crop on that piece of land. So when you're rotating a cover crop in the off season is a way to to grow corn, it's a very nitrogen intensive crop. It requires a lot of nitrogen to grow. So someone could cover crop in the off season where they're not growing corn, fava beans, a legume, because legumes are able to put nitrogen, they fix nitrogen out of the air, and they put that nitrogen back into the soil and help create fertility for that next crop of corn the following year. So no-till, cover cropping, focusing on biodiversity, meaning not a monoculture. So most small farms are a mix of all different kinds of cropping system production. And so is your farm a monoculture, or is it a diversity of plants being grown? And then for another distinction is perennial foods that are coming from perennials like trees and vines and bushes, versus annuals, which are annuals are like grains or vegetables, where you plant a seed, it grows for a season, you harvest it, and you have to replant, fertilize, and grow the next year, where a tree will give an apple or an olive or an avocado year after year, with less disturbance to the soil, less need for fertility and fertilizer, and oftentimes less even water. And so, perennial food systems versus annual food systems is another distinction to know about. And then, the animal integration. One of the most successful ways that we're regenerating land is through what's called adaptive or holistic planned grazing of animals, where we're reintroducing animals back to grasslands or prairies or pastures where the soil's been degraded, and actually the grazing and the pooping and peeing and the moving of those animals as a sort of cyclical circle on that land, adaptively moving them from place to place specifically, actually creates this enhancement of life and an enhancement of forage, meaning more grass can grow year after year, and you can have this regenerative effect. And that's why, like in the prairies, in the Great Plains, when you had bison rotating over the prairie for a long time, millennia, you have 10, 12, 13 feet of topsoil, because it was built. That topsoil was built by the integration of animals and grasses and predators moving those animals around those grasslands in a roving rotation. And now we can kind of mimic that on a farm system by moving cows to different paddocks or plots of land over a period of time.
It almost sounds like, it's almost de-evolving the agricultural system that we have now to a more like, it's just more natural. It's just kind of as close to being as if it were just a field with animals, which is, it's funny that evolving is de-evolving, but yeah, it's fascinating. I think that is so cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there is going backwards, but there's also I think there's because it's not going back to the way nature was, but it's really looking at the design of nature and how do we use the tools of this modern era and understanding to mimic a natural relationship between plants and animals and soil and environment in a way where we can continuously improve that system year after year is miraculous and inspiring, and I think gives everyone a feeling of like, when we see life coming back to land, I don't care who you are, that is a hopeful, compelling, vignette of experience and vision that just makes sense.
Yeah. So you mentioned perennials. I guess cotton would probably fall into that category.
Cotton's an annual.
It is an annual. Okay.
Yeah. It's planted and then it grows to its flowering state, and its flower is the cotton bud. And then it's again, oftentimes chopping it down and then tilling and planting again the next year. But there is people doing there's definitely experiments and people working inside of regenerative frameworks and practicing principles, applying that to cotton agriculture.
So interesting. Yeah, I obviously have no idea, but I'm learning. Do you have
like
yeah, sorry, go on.
yeah, like Christy Dawn is a cool fashion brand that I think that started in Venice that has really taken up the regenerative vision and North Star aspiration, and has been working on regenerative cotton production and bringing that into fashion. I know that Koyuchi, I think sheets, not cotton sheet company, that they also are really looking at how to go beyond sort of organic to a regenerative framework and a regenerative system of agriculture to be producing cotton. But again, it's the beginning of a great revolution of thinking and also production. I think we're at the very early stages of a new distinction in the world of agriculture that really sows a lot of hope and has a lot of promise for the future and a better way to do things that has so many ancillary benefits.
Yeah, so many. I mean, we grow. I mean, the earth is one of the biggest things that we exploit to every advantage that we can. So I think it's really interesting how many products that come out of the ground that grow that this could apply to. I mean,
that's the exciting thing, is that everything that we're resourcing that's growing from the earth, we could apply the principles and practices and understanding of the best practitioners that have discovered. And again, there's still lots of learning, and it's still an early, in some ways it's still a early game as far as how to apply regenerative agriculture across our whole agricultural system. And the question of can it apply to the whole system, or does the whole system need to change? And I would say that there's definitely there is opportunity inside of large swaths of land and larger agricultural systems to follow the principles of these regenerative practices. And it's not like there's just like an easy switch of, all right, let's just continue to grow millions of acres of corn and soy in a regenerative way. So I think clearly there's a larger shift that's needed from just a one trick pony switch. But again, I was just at the Expo West Anaheim Food Show in Southern California just 2 weeks ago, and seeing how much of the food industry is really aspiring to message and market and communicate different products that are being grown in a regenerative way. And and obviously there's lots of marketing and the opportunity for greenwashing, and there's a big I think there's a big revelation and big opportunity for a way forward that has legitimacy, has integrity, and also has viability. So I would say that's what's exciting and inspiring.
I remember in the documentary, there was like a number that, I don't know who reached this number, but it was the amount that that you predicted that could be sequestered in the soil. Do you remember what that was?
I think there was there's multiple facts and figures in there, but one statistic I think was, for 1% increase of organic matter in soil, you can hold 20 plus thousand more gallons of water in the soil. So the big deal of that is, like, when rain falls, it's not about if it falls and runs off, you didn't absorb it, didn't go into the, it can't be used by the plants. It also can't be used by recharging the aquifer. So, and then I think for carbon, it was, 1% organic matter, that per acre we can sequester, somewhere between 3 and 10 tons of carbon per acre per year into our soils through regenerative agriculture. And, there's a stat, which, again, big statistics like this are, kind of leery to throw around because there's so many factors, but, that essentially we could sequester all annual carbon that we're releasing into the atmosphere by increasing our soil organic matter by 1% to 12 inches in depth. We could sequester, all the current emissions that are being released, on an annual basis, plus sequester, some of what the legacy load of what's in the atmosphere. So the potentiality, is huge, and that's it's not an easy task, but there's lots of people coming to a similar conclusion. I know that the guy who's an Indian mystic and yogi from India named Satguru just launched a campaign. He's traveling through 25 countries over 100 days on a motorcycle, stopping to speak to presidents and ministers of states and countries to let them know one message, which is that our soils are the most important resource that everything else depends on, and if we let our soils die, everything above them will die, near after. So it is a timely, relevant, and emerging conversation and story, and piece of the solution that is compelling. And I think it's exciting because as people who eat 3 meals a day, we can, even if it's difficult and more expensive at this time, we can start to make food choices 3 meals a day that are supporting this healing and regeneration versus what is happening mostly in the conventional system, which is a degradation, a desertification, a toxification of our soils and our land and our bodies through eating food that's coming from the industrial food system that feeds the majority of or much of the planet.
Yeah, from your experience of outreach and talking to farmers, what is the biggest reason that someone might hold back once they know the information?
Change is difficult. It's also family legacy. People have been farming a long time, and things have worked over time, but things have just gotten more difficult and more difficult. But ultimately, it's the way they've been farming is the way they've always done it, so it's difficult to change. There's it's kind of like a business. I mean, farms are businesses, so to just say, oh, you got to do your business different, you have to find new customers, you have to find lots of customers, you have to diversify the crops you're selling. There's lots of there's more complexity in it And there's to just go cold turkey and go, away from chemicals to a more agroecology system. You're going to reduce your yields, in the initial couple, 2-3 years. And so how do you support farmers? How do farmers make that, chasm of loss in productivity for a few years while they're building up their soil health? And so that's why, we're working on a policy initiative, which is about how do we get the support from taxpayer dollars to incentivize farmers to do the right thing to build healthy soil, such that it leads to a cleaner environment, cleaner food, and to a more productive system long term, but is not going to be something that can happen, quickly in the short run. So, farmers need a security blanket if they're going to make a change. And right now there's no security blanket or no insurance to cover that 3-year gap of making that transition. I'm realizing I'm coming up on my time, or we're over time.
Oh, I apologize.
No worries.
Well, how about this? Why don't you just tell me where where people can connect with you online and where they can find that chart of all the different regenerative farmers that you have already that you're already working with.
So it's not necessarily just farmers that we're working with, but basically it's a map of any farmer that is identifying that they're doing regenerative practices and want to be known for that. And so it's the regenerative farm map. It's on our website, kisstheground.com. You can also follow us at Kiss the on Instagram. That's where we do a lot of communication, as well as LinkedIn. And obviously for people to go see the film, we have a membership program that allows people to support our work and our education and advocacy. So become a member of Kiss the Ground. You can find that on our website. Become a soil advocate. We have a soil advocacy training course where we train advocates all over the world, a gardening course, and obviously we're a nonprofit, so you can donate to our work. That's awesomely helpful. And also we've made tons of short form media content that tells compelling stories of regeneration that you can find on our website as well. So check us out there, follow our story, and we're launching a campaign called Regenerate America, Soils Our Common Ground, in May. So you can go check out regenerateamerica.com and sign up there to be communicated and as that progresses and the ways that we're calling people into action. So that's an awesome way to help. And appreciate the interview and appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's super fascinating work that you're doing, and I really admire it. I think there's a lot to take away, for sure. For sure.
Thank you.
You have a wonderful day. All right, bye.
A huge thank you to Ryland for his time and for his commitment to educating us all on regenerative farming and how that practice can literally turn back the carbon clock. You can find his work at www.kisstheground.com and on Instagram at kisstheground. Thank you so much for listening, and that's a wrap.
Hey, this is Erin in St. Augustine, Florida. ES Now is a Holding Court production and is written and produced by Courtney Behringer. The music is by Parker Ainsworth, fact-checked by Justin Howard. And a very special thanks to Alexandra Shook.